10 jobs' history silently erased as if they never existed at all. 911 England. It was a Sunday in early April, cool and overcast. The kind of morning when chimney smoke hung low over row houses and the streets smelled of coal and damp wool. Across the country, census enumerators knocked on doors. They carried printed forms. They asked questions. They wrote down answers in careful, slanted handwriting. One of the questions was about occupation. In homes across Britain, people answered with job titles that had existed for centuries, titles their fathers had carried, titles their grandfathers had carried, titles so familiar they required no explanation: knocker-upper, resurrectionist, gong farmer, fuller, leech collector, lamplighter, log driver, computer, necessary woman, Tosher. The enumerators wrote them down without hesitation. These were ordinary words for ordinary work. Within a generation, most of those titles would become unintelligible. Within 2 generations, they would sound invented, fictional, like words from a dead language no one thought to preserve. The people who held these jobs did not quit. They did not retire into comfortable obscurity. They were simply replaced by machines, by chemicals, by infrastructure, by laws, by a world that no longer needed what their hands could do. And when the work vanished, something else vanished with it. The workers themselves, not from life, but from memory, their skills unrecognized, their labor unremembered, their daily existence rendered incomprehensible to their own descendants. Consider this. Somewhere in your own ancestry, within the last 4 or 5 generations, someone in your bloodline held a job that no longer exists, a job you have never heard of, a job that defined their waking hours, shaped their body, determined where they lived, whom they married, how they died. You carry their blood. You do not carry their story. How does someone disappear not only from the world, but from history itself? For most of recorded history, work was not chosen. It was inherited. A son did what his father did. A daughter did what her mother did. Occupation was identity. It was woven into surnames: Cooper, Fletcher, Thatcher, Weaver, Chandler, Mason. You did not merely perform a trade. You were the trade. It lived in your name, your street, your parish, your bones. The world before industrialization moved at the speed of human hands. Every substance people touched had been harvested, processed, and shaped by someone's labor. Cloth was beaten by fullers. Streets were lit by lamplighters. Sewage was removed by gong farmers. The dead were prepared by layers out. Messages were carried by runners. There were no shortcuts. There were only hands. Political power concentrated in monarchies, landowners, and merchant classes. Ordinary workers had no representation, no archives dedicated to their experience, no historians recording their methods. Guild records existed in some trades, but guild membership was often restricted by gender, race, and class. Women's labor was particularly invisible. Enslaved people's labor was deliberately anonymized. Communication moved slowly. A letter between London and Edinburgh took days. News of a factory closure in Manchester might not reach a sister city for a week. Communities were islands, and the work done within them was understood locally, but rarely documented nationally. Record-keeping served the interests of those who funded it. Parish registers recorded baptisms, marriages, and burials, but listed occupations inconsistently. Census records, where they existed, used terminology that varied wildly between enumerators. One might write laborer. Another might write the specific trade. The difference between those 2 choices determined whether an entire profession would be remembered or forgotten. Law enforcement was localized and uneven. Courts adjudicated property disputes, but rarely concerned themselves with working conditions. A worker who was injured, displaced, or rendered obsolete had no institution to appeal to. They simply adapted, or they did not. And it was in this world that millions of people built their lives around work that seemed as permanent as the earth beneath their feet. They had no reason to believe it would end. The lamplighter had no reason to imagine electricity. The fuller had no reason to imagine chemical processing. The knocker-upper had no reason to imagine the alarm clock. Permanence is the most dangerous. Illusion. Let us begin not with a job title, but with a person. Her name was Mary Baines. She appears in the 1881 British census, recorded as a resident of Salford, Lancashire. Her listed occupation was Leech Collector. She was 37 years old. She lived with her husband Thomas, a cotton spinner, and 3 children. The eldest was 12. The youngest was 4. The census records nothing of her appearance, her voice, her temperament, but the work itself tells us something about her body. Leech collectors waded into marshes and stagnant ponds, usually barefoot, sometimes bare-legged to the thigh. They walked slowly through the water and waited for medicinal leeches to attach to their skin. Then they peeled the creatures off, dropped them into collection jars, and sold them to apothecaries and hospitals. The work required patience that bordered on stillness, cold water, hours of standing, infected bites that sometimes ulcerated. Leech collectors developed chronic leg conditions, swelling, sores that would not heal, skin discoloration that became permanent. Mary Baines did this so that doctors could practice medicine. She was someone's mother. She came home with legs bleeding from dozens of small wounds, and she washed them, and she cooked supper, and she did it again the next morning. Or consider Robert Gillespie, recorded in the 1871 Scottish census as a knocker-upper in Dundee. His job was to wake people for work. Every morning before dawn, 3 or 4 in the morning, he walked through the streets with a long pole and tapped on bedroom windows until the sleepers inside stirred and acknowledged him. He was paid a few pence per week per client. He had no alarm clock of his own. Historical accounts suggest that knocker-uppers often simply never slept properly. Some used the position of stars. Some relied on internal rhythm honed over years. Some drank strong tea all night. Robert Gillespie's entire livelihood depended on the absence of a technology that would be mass-produced within his children's lifetime. These were not extraordinary people. They did not lead armies or write books or build monuments. They did ordinary work under ordinary conditions for ordinary pay. They were defined by what they could do with their hands, their legs, their tolerance for discomfort. And nothing in the record suggests that any of them knew their work was about to become impossible to explain to the next generation. The world was changing beneath their feet. They could not feel it yet. The last days of these occupations can be reconstructed, not perfectly, but clearly enough to understand the pattern. The pattern was always the same. It happened in stages. Stage 1, the invention. A machine was built. A chemical process was refined. A piece of infrastructure was funded. It happened in a laboratory, a workshop, or a government office. The workers it would replace were not consulted. They were not informed. In most cases, they had never heard of the inventor. Stage 2, the transition. The new method was adopted slowly at first, then with accelerating speed. For a period, sometimes years, sometimes decades, old and new coexisted. Lamplighters worked alongside the first electric streetlights. Knocker-uppers continued even as alarm clocks appeared in shop windows. Human computers calculated alongside the first mechanical computing machines. During this stage, the workers often believed the change was temporary or partial or limited to large cities. Stage 3, the tipping point. The economics became unarguable. The new method was faster, cheaper, more reliable. Employers switched. Municipalities switched. Governments switched. The remaining workers in the old trade found their client base shrinking month by month. Stage 4, the last practitioner. One person, sometimes identifiable, usually not, performed the job for the final time. They may not have known it was the final time. There was no ceremony, no announcement. The last leech collector waded into a pond one morning and never went back. The last lamplighter extinguished a gas flame and walked home into a world that no longer needed his ladder, his wick trimmer, his pre-dawn route through empty streets. Consider that for a moment. The final performance of a skill that had existed for centuries, and no one recorded it. No one photographed it. No one noted the date. The end came not with a pronouncement, but with an absence. A morning when no one came to do the work because, no one was paying for it anymore. For each of the 10 jobs that follow, this pattern holds. The details vary. The arc does not. Something was needed. Someone did it. Something replaced them. And then the silence. After this point, the record falls silent. The last traces of these occupations survive in documents that were never meant to be historical records: census forms, trade directories, municipal payroll ledgers, parish registers where a clergyman wrote a job title next to a burial entry. These are the final evidence that millions of people performed work we can no longer visualize. The 1911 census of England and Wales is particularly significant. It was the last British census in which many of these occupational titles appeared in meaningful numbers. The forms were filled out by the workers themselves for the first time in their own handwriting. You can see the ink. You can see the careful, sometimes uncertain penmanship of people writing their own job titles on an official document. One man in Whitechapel wrote Tosher in a hand that sloped to the right, the ink slightly blotted. He was describing his profession, scavenging the sewers of London for valuables, coins, metal, anything dropped or washed into the tunnels beneath the city. A woman in Leeds wrote necessary woman. She cleaned privies and outdoor latrines. Her handwriting was small and precise. These documents were filed, archived, stored in government repositories. They were not read again for decades. When genealogists began digitizing census records in the late 20th century, they encountered job titles that required research to decode. The language of labor had changed so completely that the words themselves had become opaque. The physical documents still exist. The ink has faded but remains legible. The paper has yellowed. In some cases, water damage has smudged entries, erasing individual names while the occupational column remains readable, as if the job outlasted the person, then the person outlasted the job, and finally neither survived intact. These census forms are the last written proof that this work was real, that it was ordinary, that someone sat at a table, dipped a pen, and wrote it down without hesitation because it was simply what they did, and then nothing. The rest is silence. When a job disappears, no one calls the authorities. There is no crime scene. There is no missing persons report. There is only a slow recognition, felt first in the body, then in the household ledger, that the work is no longer there. The lamplighters of London provide a clear example. Gas street lighting began in 1812, and by mid-century employed hundreds of men in London alone, each responsible for a circuit of street lamps. They worked at dusk and dawn, lighting and extinguishing each flame individually. The London Gas Light and Coke Company maintained detailed payroll records. When electric street lighting was introduced in the 1880s, conversion happened borough by borough. A lamplighter might lose one street, then three, then his entire route. The transition in London stretched from the 1880s through the early 1900s, but the outcome was never in doubt. No one organized the lamplighters. No union fought for their retention. Municipal records show budget allocations shifting from gas maintenance to electrical infrastructure. The line items for lamplighter wages simply shrank, then disappeared from the ledger entirely. The workers themselves were absorbed. Some into electrical maintenance crews, some into general labor, some into unemployment. Their specific skill, the knowledge of gas pressure, wick length, optimal flame height, the geography of a route memorized over years, became worthless overnight. Their families noticed immediately. Household income dropped. Some families moved to cheaper housing. Children were pulled from school to work. These consequences were real and measurable, but they were experienced privately. No journalist documented the lamplighters' household budget collapsing. The gap between the job's disappearance and any public acknowledgement of that loss was not days or weeks. It was generations. It took nearly a century before social historians began to reconstruct what these workers' lives had actually looked like. By then, there was no one left alive who remembered. No one searched for these jobs the way one searches for a missing person. There was no investigation, no inquiry, no commission tasked with preserving the knowledge of work that was no longer economically viable. The loss was administrative, not criminal. It was recorded in the language of efficiency, not of grief. But later, decades later, sometimes more than a century later, historians began to look. Mayhew was among the first. Henry Mayhew, a journalist who published London Labour and the London Poor between 1851 and 1861, interviewed hundreds of workers in trades that were already beginning to vanish. He spoke with toshers, mudlarks, pure finders, crossing sweepers, rat catchers, and dozens of others. He recorded their words, their earnings, their daily routines, His 4 volumes are among the only first-hand accounts of these occupations in the workers' own voices. Later efforts were more systematic but less intimate. The Victoria County History Project, begun in 1899, documented local industries and trades across England, preserving guild records and municipal employment data. Industrial archaeologists in the 20th century excavated workshops, factories, and infrastructure sites, recovering physical evidence of vanished trades. Tools, workbenches, residue patterns that revealed forgotten chemical processes. Genealogists provided an unexpected avenue. As millions of people began researching their family trees in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, they encountered ancestral occupations they could not identify. Online forums filled with questions. What was a fuller? What did a knocker-upper do? My great-great-grandmother is listed as a necessary woman. What does that mean? These amateur researchers, searching for their own blood, became accidental archaeologists of labor. But the search had fundamental limits. No one had recorded the physical movements, the precise technique of attaching a leech, the exact rhythm of a knocker-upper's pole against glass, the method Asher used to navigate a sewer by touch in total darkness. The knowledge was embodied. It lived in hands and muscle memory. When the last practitioner died, the skill died with them. What was not done is as significant as what was. No government archived these methods. No museum preserved the tools while practitioners still lived to demonstrate them. No oral history project reached these workers before they were gone. Understanding why these occupations vanished from memory requires understanding who controlled the record. Records were kept by institutions, churches, governments, guilds, companies. These institutions recorded what they needed. They needed tax revenue, military conscription numbers, parish membership, employee costs. They did not need to preserve the texture of daily labor. A census enumerator wrote Fuller. He did not write a person who beats woolen cloth in water and clay to thicken and clean it, standing in a wooden trough for 12 hours, the arms aching, the hands stained yellow-brown, the lungs full of wet fiber dust. The word was recorded. The world behind the word was not. Class was. The primary obstacle. These were overwhelmingly working-class and lower-class occupations. The people who held them were largely illiterate or semi-literate. They did not write memoirs. They did not keep diaries. They did not correspond with people who kept archives. Their existence in the historical record depends almost entirely on what other people, employers, enumerators, journalists, magistrates, chose to write about them. Gender compounded the erasure. Women's domestic and semi-domestic labor, necessary women, laundresses, wet nurses, was systematically undercounted in official records. Married women were often recorded simply as wife with no occupation listed, even when they worked. Geographic isolation mattered. Rural trades vanished more completely than urban ones because rural areas had fewer journalists, fewer record keepers, and fewer institutions preserving local knowledge. And then there was the sheer indifference of progress. The people who built electrical grids did not mourn the lamplighter. The people who manufactured alarm clocks did not document the knocker-upper. Innovation celebrated itself. It did not eulogize what it destroyed. The trail went cold because no one was walking it. These lives were not hidden by conspiracy or malice. They were simply unpreserved, overlooked, deemed insufficiently important to maintain in the archive of human experience. The truth was not hidden. It was simply never preserved. Now, let us name them. The 10 jobs that history silently erased. 1. The knocker-upper. Employed from the Industrial Revolution through the 1920s in Britain and Ireland. They woke factory workers by tapping on windows with long poles or pea shooters, replaced by mass-produced alarm clocks. The last known knocker-uppers worked in Manchester and the mill towns of Lancashire into the 1950s. Anachronisms tolerated out of habit. 2. The Leech Collector. Active across Europe from the medieval period through the mid-19th century, they supplied medicinal leeches to the medical profession. The practice declined as bloodletting fell out of medical favor after the 1850s. Wild leech populations had been devastated by overcollection. 3. The Gong Farmer. Medieval through early modern England, they removed human waste from cesspits and privies. legally restricted to working only at night. The job was eliminated by the development of modern sewage systems in the 19th century. The word gong derived from the Old English gang, meaning to go, as in where waste goes. 4. The fuller, one of the oldest recorded textile occupations, dating to antiquity. They cleaned and thickened woolen cloth by beating it in water mixed with fuller's earth or stale urine, replaced by mechanized fulling mills beginning in the medieval period and fully obsolete by the 19th century. 5. The Tosher, active in London from the late 18th century through the mid-19th century. They entered the city's sewer system to scavenge for coins, metal, rope, and other valuables washed underground. The practice was made illegal in 1840, though Toshers continued to work covertly for years afterward. Hold that detail in your mind. 5 occupations named, 5 more to follow. Each one sustained real families. Each one shaped real bodies. Each one answered a need that the world once considered permanent. Someone waded into cold water every morning so that medicine could function. Someone descended into sewers so that nothing of value was wasted. Someone stood in the dark, tapping on glass so that the mills would run on time. 6. The lamplighter, employed by gas companies and municipal authorities across Europe and North America from the early 19th century through the early 20th. In London alone, an estimated 1,500 lamplighters maintained the city's gas streetlights at their peak. Electric lighting rendered them obsolete by the 1930s in most cities. 7. The log driver. They transported timber by riding logs down rivers from forest to sawmill, practiced extensively across North America, Scandinavia, and Russia from the 17th century through the mid-20th, replaced by railroads and trucking. The last major log drive in the northeastern United States occurred on the Kennebec River in Maine in 1976. 8. The human computer. Men and women employed to perform mathematical calculations by hand, often in teams, producing astronomical tables, ballistics data, navigation charts, and census. Tabulations. The term computer originally referred to the person, not the machine. NASA employed human computers into the 1960s. The work was disproportionately performed by women and disproportionately uncredited. 9. The necessary woman, employed to clean and maintain public and private latrines, privies, and washrooms, primarily in Britain from the 17th through the 19th century, almost exclusively female, rarely listed in official employment records despite being essential to public sanitation. 10. The resurrectionist, professional body snatchers who supplied medical schools with cadavers for anatomical study, primarily in Britain and the United States during the 18th and early 19th centuries, made largely unnecessary by the Anatomy Act of 1832 in Britain, which legalized the donation of unclaimed bodies to medical institutions. 10 occupations, tens of thousands of workers across them. Each job answered a real need. Each worker possessed skills refined over years. None of these jobs were trivial. All of them were essential, until the world decided they were not. There is a question that labor historians have asked with increasing directness over the past several decades. Were these jobs forgotten because they were obsolete, or were they forgotten because the people who did them were considered disposable? The pattern is difficult to dismiss. The jobs that vanished most completely from collective memory share a common characteristic. They were performed by people at the bottom of social hierarchies: the poor, the illiterate, women, in some cases, children. A banker from 1850 is still comprehensible today. A factory owner's ledger is preserved in archives and studied in universities. But the woman who cleaned his privy, the necessary woman, exists only as a job title in a census record, if she was recorded at all. Erasure was not always accidental. In some cases, it was structural. The guilds that might have preserved trade knowledge excluded women and the poorest workers. The institutions that maintained archives served the interests of property owners, not laborers. Government record-keeping prioritized taxable income and military service, not the daily mechanics of how a city functioned at its lowest levels. The resurrectionist is perhaps the most revealing case. Their work was essential to the advancement of medical science. Surgeons depended on them. Medical schools would not have functioned without them, and yet they were treated as criminals, stigmatized, prosecuted. The very profession that required their services refused to acknowledge them publicly. They were needed. They were used. And then they were erased from the story of medical progress. Let that settle. The uncomfortable truth is not that these jobs disappeared. It is that the systems those workers served had no mechanism, and perhaps no desire, to remember them. In recent decades, a small but dedicated community of researchers has worked to recover these vanished occupations from obscurity. Dr. Emma Griffin, a historian at the University of East Anglia, has studied working-class autobiographies from the 18th and 19th centuries. These are rare documents in which laborers describe their own working lives in their own words. Fewer than 800 such autobiographies are known to exist from the entire period. Each one is a window into labor that was otherwise recorded only from the outside. The digitization of census records has been transformative. Projects like Find My Past, Ancestry, and Family Search have made millions of handwritten census entries searchable by occupation. For the first time, it is possible to track how many people in a given region identified as fullers, toshers, knocker-uppers, or necessary women, and to watch those numbers decline decade by decade until they reach zero. Industrial archaeology has contributed physical evidence. Excavations of former fulling mills, gasworks, and sewer systems have recovered tools and infrastructure that illuminate working conditions. In 2006, archaeologists working beneath London found remnants of the Victorian sewer system, consistent with descriptions of Tosher routes documented by Mayhew in the 1850s. The Museum of English Rural Life at the University of Reading preserves tools and equipment from dozens of vanished agricultural and domestic trades. Their collections include objects whose function is no longer immediately apparent, a deliberate action. Curatorial choice to confront visitors with the reality that common knowledge can become incomprehensible within a few generations. New evidence continues to emerge, though slowly. Digitized parish records occasionally reveal occupational titles not previously catalogued. Local history societies in British mill towns have collected oral histories from elderly residents whose parents or grandparents held jobs that no longer exist. But for most of these occupations, the recovery effort is essentially archival. The practitioners are gone. The embodied knowledge, the feel of the work in the hands, the rhythm of the day is irrecoverable. Some silences are permanent. When a job disappears, a family absorbs the blow. Think about the knocker-upper's wife. Her husband left the house every morning at 3 a.m. For years, this was the shape of her life. The creak of the door before dawn, the silence after he left, the return as the children woke. Her household budget was built around his few shillings per week. Then the alarm clock arrived. Not all at once, gradually. One client canceled, then another. The route shortened, the income shrank, and one morning, there was no reason to leave the house at 3 a.m. at all. What did that morning feel like? We do not know her name. She does not appear in any record with her own occupation listed. She was wife of, invisible even before the job that defined her household vanished. But she was real. She adjusted. She found other income, or she did not. She fed her children somehow. She watched a way of life, not glamorous, not comfortable, but hers, dissolve into irrelevance, and she carried that loss without anyone recording it. The children of these workers inherited a specific kind of silence. Their parents' skills were untranslatable. A fuller's child could not explain to a grandchild what the work entailed because the materials, the tools, the vocabulary had all ceased to exist. The knowledge became unspeakable, not forbidden, but literally inexpressible in a world that had moved past it. Somewhere, a child grew old never knowing how to describe what her father did every day. Not because she had forgotten, but because the words no longer connected to anything anyone could see or touch. This is the cruelty of occupational erasure. It is not violent. It is not dramatic. It is simply the quiet severance of a thread. The thread that connects what a person does with who a person is. She had a name that someone once called out across a room. We do not know it. The record does not hold it. Mary Baines, the Leech Collector of Salford, left a trace. Her name survives in a census entry. That makes her exceptional. Most workers in these vanished trades left nothing at all. Historians estimate that before the 20th century, the majority of human beings who ever lived were never recorded by name in any surviving document. They were born, they worked, they suffered, they loved, they died, and the only evidence of their existence was the continuation of their bloodline. If it continued at all, the workers who filled these erased occupations were disproportionately drawn from the populations least likely to leave records. They were poor. Many were illiterate. Women among them were often recorded only in relation to a husband. Children who worked, and many did, as mudlarks, link boys, crossing sweepers, were sometimes not recorded even in death. Record-keeping has always been an exercise of power. Those who control the archives decide who is remembered. A king's breakfast is documented. A fuller's entire life is a single word in a column. The asymmetry is not accidental. It reflects evaluation. A determination made by institutions and repeated across centuries that some lives are worth recording in detail and some are worth only a tick mark. Even within these 10 occupations, the erasure was uneven. The human computers of the 20th century, women like those at NASA Langley Research Center, have been partially recovered through the work of Margot Lee Shetterly and others. But the human computers of the 18th century, the women who calculated astronomical tables for the Royal Observatory at wages a fraction of their male counterparts, remain largely anonymous. The further down the social hierarchy, the deeper the silence. Think about that for a moment. This was never about 10 jobs. This was about the architecture of memory itself, who builds it, who maintains it, and who is left. Outside its walls, every archive is also an act of exclusion. Every record preserved is 1,000 records that were not. Mary Baines, Salford, Lancashire, 1881. A cool morning, the kind where mist sits on standing water and does not lift until midday. She wades into the marsh. The water reaches her calves, then her knees. She stands still. She waits. The leeches find her by the warmth of her blood. She is not thinking about history. She is thinking about supper and her youngest child's cough, and the pennies she will earn from the apothecary on Bridge Street. She is thinking about the weight of the glass jar in her hand, and the sting of the bites she has long since stopped flinching from. She does not know that within 50 years, almost no one in England will understand what her job was. She does not know that her occupation will become a curiosity, a footnote, a question asked by a stranger on the internet who stumbled across her name while searching for something else. She does not know that she is one of the last. The jar fills slowly. The water is cold. The sky is gray and low, and the only sound is the faint movement of her legs through the shallows and the distant clatter of a loom from the mill across the road. This is the sound of a world about to forget itself. 10 jobs, hundreds of thousands of workers, centuries of accumulated knowledge, gone. Not with a cry, but with a clerical transition. A budget line removed, a census column left empty, a word that stopped, meaning anything to anyone still alive. The water in the marsh is still now. No one wades in. No one waits. The silence is not empty. It is full of everyone who stood here before.